So let's talk about the first blackjack. This first blackjack. Second one was John Pershing, right? This is John A. Logan. He's a pro-slavery guy initially. He's of Southern descent and Southern culture. And the reason I wanted to talk about him, his story is really a microcosm, the story of American politics in the late 1850s, early 1860s. He's a Douglas Democrat to start. Later on, he has some big changes of heart. So he modifies a lot of his racist views. You'll see how his politics change. And this picture reminds me a little bit of Dan Sickles, if you guys ever seen pictures of Dan Sickles. And his career reminds me a little bit of Dan Sickles, minus the shooting people in the street and the prostitution and the adultery. This guy his mistress was political fame, and he didn't murder anyone in the street as far as I know. So their stories have some parallels. So anyway, as I was talking with Grant and Patricia and Steve on the way up to Louisiana, Gettysburg and the Killer Angels and all that's the gateway drug to the Civil War. We're going to fix into mainline some heroin here, so just get ready. So my main source is this book. I was down in Lebanon, Missouri, and I had about 4 hours to kill, so it's hard to kill 4 hours in Lebanon, but I found myself at one of those antique stores, and I'm looking around, and there's a collection of books, and it's Civil War books, and of course it's Gettysburg this and Gettysburg that. I'm like, okay, great, I love Gettysburg, but I've had it, and I find this. And so I'm like, John Logan, why is that name familiar? And this is my main source for this. Well, we met John Logan, if you guys remember, up in Springfield at the Illinois Military Museum. They had his coat, they had his sword, they had his swagger stick. So John Logan appears to us then, and then in my Siege of Corinth presentation, he's in that, and now all of a sudden I find this obscure book written in 1967 about John A. Logan. I said, okay, I got to figure out who this guy is. So the author of this book says he may be the most noteworthy 19th century American to escape notice in the 20th and 21st centuries, and I would agree with that. So we're going to talk about his family background. We're going to talk about Egypt. Like Egypt, what does that have to do with it? You'll see his Mexican War service, his early politics, his congressional history, what he does at First Bull Run, his regimental command. He rises through brigade, division, corps command, army command. You didn't know he commanded an army, did you? His post-war politics, and then what he has to do with Memorial Day. So his grandfather immigrates from Ireland. His dad's born in Ireland, and his dad, John A. Logan Sr., settles in Perry County, Missouri. I guess that's where Perryville is. I don't know. You guys would know. And he was a slaveholder prior to moving to Illinois. In 1824, he moves to Brownsville, Illinois, which is downriver, south of Perry County. You don't think of Illinois as being south of the southern parts of Missouri, but part of Illinois is absolutely south of Missouri. His wife's brother, future Illinois lieutenant governor. He's a colonel in the Illinois militia in the Black Hawk War. Likely, but not really documented, if Elizabeth's dad knew Captain Abraham Lincoln in the Black Hawk War, but probably. You start to see these connections. So they're down here in Brownsville. That big red dot is Jackson County, Illinois, where they're from. So you can kind of picture, here's where St. Louis would be, way far south of St. Louis. And by the way, the Kentucky border kind of comes in here. And if you draw a dot from St. Louis all the way over here, you hit Richmond, Virginia, right? So this is south latitude from Richmond, Virginia. So these are Southerners. This is where he's from. Well, they move upriver to what is Murfreesboro, Illinois today, and their son, John A. Logan, is born on February 9th, 1826. Courthouse burned, so John Sr. proposes, move the courthouse to where we live in Murfreesboro, and the modern-day Brownsville, Illinois is 87 miles away, doesn't have any connection to that. The old Brownsville, Illinois is a ghost town. But John Sr. is a Jackson Democrat. Here's John Sr., John A. Logan Sr. Now, you guys remember the name of Lincoln's second law partner. His first one was John Todd Stewart. His third one was William Herndon. His second law partner was Stephen Logan. I can't prove the relation of John A. Logan to Stephen T. Logan, and there's no documentation that there is, but there's not a ton of Logans, and it's quite possible that probably 2 or 3 generations back they were connected, but I can't prove it. So one of the things you got to know to understand this is the migration patterns into Illinois. So here's one pattern that comes up the Hudson River to Albany, New York. They complete the Erie Canal in I don't remember when they committed, 1830, something like that, something like that. This is a later migration pattern. The Yankees in Connecticut and Massachusetts and New York, plus a lot of Irish immigrants and German immigrants that come into New York, up the Hudson, across the Erie Canal, through the Great Lakes, into Chicago, into northern Illinois. You have this earlier migration pattern in green through the Cumberland Gap, along the Boone's Trail, down the Ohio River, up the Mississippi, up the Illinois River, into central and southern Illinois. And these are, well, this empties out from Washington and North Carolina. So these are southerners. So you have, this is the earlier migration pattern. So just like in Missouri, in Illinois, the southerners dominate. The southern part of the state is settled first. The second state capital is Vandalia before it moves to Springfield. So you got these southern-oriented people down here. Then later you have German, Irish, and New Englanders, etc. in the northern part of the state. The Germans mostly become Republicans, not all, of course, and the Irish mostly become Democrats. This big shift hits around 1840 to 1850 because the Erie Canal gets built then. Well, Lincoln's going to ride that crest, right, of that northern view. And if you remember, Lincoln-Douglas debates, they all take place in different parts of the state, and Douglas will lay into Lincoln. He says, hey, up here, you say one thing about slavery, and down here you say something else. Well, why do you think you did that? Because the people were different in different parts of Illinois. These are the southerners down here, and this way down here is where John A. Logan's from, so he's part of that southern migration. So, he lives in Egypt. Most of northern and central Illinois is covered with snow in 1830. But southern Illinois is not, so they called it Egypt. And gradually today it would be called Little Egypt. And it's a reference to Genesis chapter 42. Joseph sends his 11 sons down to Egypt to buy grain. When I was a kid, people would say, oh, that's way out in Egypt. And I thought they meant the country. No, because I grew up in central Illinois. No, they meant the southern part of Illinois when they were saying Egypt. So everything from Alton east to Indiana and everything south was Egypt. So if you look at this map, by the way, Illinois becomes a state in 1818. 1824, they have a referendum to try to legalize slavery in Illinois. The states in black all voted for it. The counties in black all voted for it. The counties in white didn't. And it failed. But it's interesting, in 1824, there's a movement to legalize slavery in Illinois. And at 57 to 43, it's not an overwhelming majority. It's a good enough majority. One of the other things you notice about this early map of Illinois, this is all Sangamon County here. And as the state settles, they start carving other counties out of Sangamon County. But every Lincoln biographer talks about Sangamon County, and they're thinking modern day Sangamon County, which is around Springfield. This was all Sangamon County back then. So, something to kind of think about it. There's eventually 102 counties. You know how I know that? Because I saw the musical The Music Man. So, anyway. So recently, Wikipedia said that Logan County, Illinois is named for our John A. Logan. No, it's named for his dad. Wikipedia finally corrected that. His dad's a legislator in Vandalia with Abraham Lincoln. And so they go to carve out another county out of Sangamon County. I think Logan County is over here. Don't quote me. It's near Sangamon County. And they say, what are we going to name it? They can't come up with a name. Lincoln says, hey, John, how about we name it Logan County after you? Good. Yeah, that sounds great. So Lincoln the Whig turns to his Democrat opponent and says, yeah, it'd be nice we named the county after you. So kind of interesting how politics maybe used to be. And boy, now you wouldn't probably see that. But anyway. So John A. Logan Jr., Mexican War comes. He's elected a second lieutenant in the company that's incorporated into the 1st Regiment of Illinois Volunteers in Alton. They take a steamboat to Fort Leavenworth, and then they march from Fort Leavenworth to Santa Fe, New Mexico, 800 miles. They're there for 2 months. Nothing really happens. They march back to Fort Leavenworth. They take the steamboat back to Alton, and they're mustered out. By the way, they had to walk to Alton. right, and then take the steamboat to Fort Leavenworth, Kansas. There's only 4 Illinois regiments that served in the Mexican War, 2 that were formed but never activated. So he doesn't see combat, but he gets great experience. How do you march a regiment 800 miles? How do you feed that regiment? How do you clothe that regiment? What do you do when their shoes wear out? How do you get, feed for your horses? How do you manage these guys for 2 months in Santa Fe, New Mexico with nothing to do? So he learns about discipline. He learns about all those things. They're going to stand him in good stead later. So the war's over. He doesn't really see any service, but he's got this experience. He's 22 years old, becomes a prosecuting attorney in the 3rd Judicial District, and runs for his dad's old seat in the Illinois legislature. And the first thing he does is introduce a thing called the Pro-Negro Exclusion Bill, which passes in 1853. He is also for strict enforcement of the Fugitive Slave Act. He's also very pro-union, and he's a Douglas Democrat. So if you look at this cartoon here, which was made after the Civil War in the 1880s, you got Seward here, William Seward, thank you. You've got Lincoln here. You've got Charles Sumner here. And here's John A. Logan, and here is some fugitive slave catchers hauling away some enslaved people. And the caption reads, "No interference with slave hunters." And the caption says, "You call it the dirty work of the Democratic Party to catch fugitive slaves for the Southern people. We are willing to perform that dirty work." So this is what John A. Logan stands up in the legislature in 1859, and he makes that speech in the old state capitol. They print this in 1884 his enemies print this to try to discredit him. So in the 1852 Illinois House, there's 59 Democrats, 16 Whigs, and 1 Free Soiler, so the Democrats pretty much run it. He introduces the Negro Exclusion Bill, which I'll talk about in a second. It passes. There's a lot of dry motions out there to make Illinois a dry state. He votes against them wisely. His constituents do not want Illinois to be a dry state. And there's a great debate in Illinois. Do we run the railroad east to west to connect like St. Louis to Louisville? Or do we run it north to south to connect Chicago to Cairo? He always voted to connect the river from St. Louis to Egypt. It eventually connects Chicago down to Cairo, which will become important later. They'll win the north-south railroad debate. So in the 1848 Illinois Constitution, African Americans can't vote, they can't serve in the militia. The 1850 census has 5,436 African Americans in the state. 3,000 of them are in Egypt, the southern part of the state. There is a Negro Exclusion Bill, and he gives a speech. He says, "Nor can I understand how it is that men can become so fanatical in their notions as to forget that they're white, forget the sympathy over the white man, and have his bosom heaving with it for those persons of color. It has almost become an offense to the white man. Unfortunate were these gentlemen in their birth. They could not have been ushered into existence with black skin and a woolly head." So I don't like this about John A. Logan, but here's what I do like. You can't whitewash his racism with a lost cause mythology because he's a northerner, he's an Illinoisan, so this doesn't get papered over with that lost cause mythology narrative. It's out here for everybody to see. And what he's speaking about is Northern Illinois abolitionists. Some Democrats would join the Free Soilers and the Whigs to oppose this, and what you have is the kind of a beginning of the Proto-Republican Party here. By the way, this passes in 1853. Guess when it gets repealed? Not till 1863, right? 2 years into the Civil War, they finally, maybe we ought to repeal that. And what does it say? It says, hey, if you're a new African-American person in the state, you got 10 days to get out, or we fine you $500, or we sell you at auction. Yeah, that passed in 1853. And if you're already here, you can't vote, can't serve in the militia, can't testify against whites, can't bear arms. Logan is the author of this. Now, if you ever read Doris Kearns Goodwin, Team of Rivals, they talk about Salmon Chase. He made his political bones on repealing this almost identical law in Ohio, and they never forgave him for it, right? That's why one of the reasons why he didn't get the Republican nomination in 1860. So we don't like to think of Illinois being a racist state, but here's the truth. It was. This passed. It passed, with flying colors, mostly voted for by the Illinois Democrats. His judicial district just so happens to correlate with the 19th Illinois Congressional District. So while he's not in the Illinois Congress, he's a prosecutor. Douglas comes along, he tours Southern Illinois with Douglas, and they give pro-Kansas-Nebraska Act speeches together. So he is a Douglas Democrat all the way. He meets his wife. His wife is the daughter of his captain from when he was in Santa Fe for the Mexican War. Unlike Mary Todd Lincoln, Mary Logan travels the circuit with John A. Logan together until their first child is born in 1856, and then she was traveling with him, but they enjoyed traveling together. 1856 election comes along. Logan campaigns for Douglas and Buchanan. Buchanan barely wins Illinois, and the Democrats lose the Illinois governor's race to a guy who had switched parties to this new Republican Party, but the Democrats have the power in the legislature. So he returns to his old state house seat. He gives a speech attacking Bissell, which is not exactly courageous in Southern Illinois at the time, right? This makeup will have big consequences, though, for the 1858 Senate election, because we're still under the old structure of the South having more power from the old 1850 census, but people had moved into the North, but they had not changed their congressional districts. So Buchanan accepts the Lecompton Constitution in Kansas. Anybody remember what the Lecompton Constitution was?
Pro-slavery.
Yeah, so Buchanan says, great, I want this to be calmed down. We'll accept it. And Douglas says, no, we got to have popular sovereignty. So the Democratic Party splits. You know, be careful what happens when you have a monopoly on political power, because when you do, you'll just split into two parties. And so you see a split in Illinois among the Democrats. Logan and most of Egypt side with Douglas. You have to pick your sides. They pick with Douglas. And because of that, the Illinois Democrats back Logan for the U.S. Congress now. And he appears with Douglas in the Lincoln-Douglas debates in Jonesboro and Alton. He wins election overwhelmingly to go to the U.S. Congress. So, by the way, I think Douglas splitting with Buchanan over the Lecompton Constitution probably hurt his chances for presidency more than things he said during the Lincoln-Douglas debate. The South was livid with Douglas over not accepting and promoting this Kansas Constitution. So here's your 9 Illinois congressional districts. First up in Chicago, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th. 6th was Lincoln's congressional district, although at the time it was probably split up a little bit differently. Logan's down here in the 9th. The guy in Congress from the 8th congressional district is a guy named John McClernand. You guys have probably heard of him. So Logan will carry the 9th district. McClernand carries the 8th. There's another couple of Douglas Democrats that carry, I think, the 7th and the 5th. The other 5 Congress in the 1857 election are Republicans. So the 2 senators, there's one Democratic senator, 1 Republican senator from Illinois, 4 Democrat congressmen, 5 Republican congressmen. The Illinois delegation is split. By the way, he's a man of many faces. There, I think he looks like Johnny Cash, but before I thought he looked like Dan Sickles. So, Fugitive Slave Act is being debated. He'll give up and give a speech. He'll say, every fugitive slave that's been arrested in Illinois or in any of the western states, and I call Illinois a western state, for I'm ashamed longer to call it a northern state, has been made by Democrats. In Illinois, the Democrats have all that work to do. You call it the dirty work of the Democratic Party to catch slaves for the Southern people. We are willing to perform that dirty work. I do not consider it disgraceful to perform dirty or not dirty, which is in accordance with the land and the Constitution of the country. So the Republican press calls him Dirty Work Logan. That's the name they tag him with. You know, this is the name of nicknames. Lincoln was Spotty Lincoln, if you'll recall. Later on, his regiment the 31st Illinois Regiment, which he was the colonel of, they will adopt the name of the Dirty First Illinois Regiment in honor of Logan to kind of thumb their nose at that. So they're kind of proud of it. So here's that dirty work reference again in that cartoon. So he goes to Congress. There's 109 Republicans, 101 Democrats, 27 Whigs, and know-nothings. The Whigs and know-nothings have the power right now because it's so evenly split. They're the kingmakers. And the first thing they try to do is elect a speaker. So Logan votes for McLaren for Speaker through several ballots, except when he votes for Clement Vallandigham. You remember who Clement Vallandigham was?
Copperhead.
Yeah, he was the guy that they exiled to Canada. He came back, unfortunately. So Logan votes for McLaren unless he's voting for Vallandigham, so that tells you where his head is, right? There's three other candidates. One of them, John Sherman, is William Tecumseh Sherman's brother. In late January of 1859, three Democrats switched their vote, and a Republican from New Jersey is elected as Speaker. And he says, the defeat of Sherman has afforded us some satisfaction. We would have been better pleased if, in addition, we could have had a Democratic Speaker. So Logan's like, anybody but this William Sherman guy. Well, here's the problem later. He's going to be in William Tecumseh Sherman's command. So, be careful what you say, I suppose. So Logan goes to both Democratic conventions and campaigns for Douglas at both. Logan, after the Democratic split in 1860, where the Southerners split off to form their own party, he begins to stump the state against secessionism. So he's a pro-union guy. He's a Douglas Democrat. Douglas was pro-union. Yes, he's a violent racist. Not violent, but virulent, perhaps. He runs for re-election, and he beats his Republican challenger pretty soundly. In the state, Douglas wins the state pretty soundly there. Lincoln, these are Egypt's totals. So Douglas wins 17,000 votes in Egypt. Lincoln wins 3,900. Lincoln will win the state, but Egypt still overwhelmingly votes for Douglas. Not too many votes for Breckinridge. He's back in Congress as South Carolina secedes. The Illinois members introduce a joint resolution which says the Union must and should be preserved. McLaren says the Northwest cannot afford to submit to disunion, except as an unavoidable necessity. But all Illinois congressmen, Republican and Democrat, will vote on this resolution. They may disagree on the methods, but they agree that the country's got to stay together. Meanwhile, Logan is saying wonderful things about Lincoln. He says, history informs us that Nero, a royal but insane and bloodthirsty man who fiddled while Rome was burning. And it does seem to me that the president-elect and his friends, flushed and drunken with victory, are plunging deeper into their fanatical orgies. The nearer our beloved country is undone, we of the Northwest cannot stand silently by while the joint action of extremists are dragging us to ruin. Now, by extremists, he means Republicans over here. Of course, they want to paint them all as extremists, and secessionists over here. So this is his middle ground, believe it or not. And this is in a private letter that was never intended to see the light of day, but obviously it did because I have it. Not the original, but anyway. So the 36th Congress makes a resolution. John Sherman introduces this non-interference bill that says we're going to guarantee slavery where it exists. We're going to vote against calling out the state militias to defend the Union. We're going to enforce the fugitive slave law. He votes for all these things. February 23rd, the Illinois delegation meets with Lincoln, and we have no idea what happened in that meeting. And then Logan returns home. And then he goes quiet. Meanwhile, since the Republicans control the state legislature, they start gerrymandering. Now, I always thought gerrymandering was a word from the 1970s. The February 9th, 1861 Illinois State Register used the word gerrymandering, so it's been around for a while. So he moves to Marion, Illinois, because he gets gerrymandered out of his district, and he starts writing letters of support for the Union to Republican Illinois congressmen. In some of these letters, he compares Lincoln to George III, so that tells you where his head is still. And Fort Sumter occurs, and from April to June 1861, Logan makes no public statements at all. So I think public opinion in Egypt was shifting. I think Logan's opinion was starting to shift, but he's an opportunist. He sticks his finger up in the air and goes, okay, the wind is blowing toward this Republican pro-union, but I'm not anti-slavery, though. Polk County, Illinois votes to secede. There is a town meeting in Marion, Illinois, where they protest Lincoln's call for troops. And he says, in the event that the border states secede, actually this was the Marion town meeting resolutions, not Logan. The interest of the citizens of Southern Illinois imperatively demands a division of the state. We heartily pledge ourselves to use all means in our power to effect the same and attach ourselves to the Southern Confederacy. Carbondale, Illinois says, no, there's no unanimity of opinion about this, but this is what they come up with. So remember, the Virginia, the Kentucky, the Missouri governors, when Lincoln called for troops, kind of had similar vein to this. Logan's father-in-law is on the committee that drafts these resolutions, but Logan himself has nothing to do with it. Now later, his political opponents will try to attach this to him, but there's no evidence that he had anything to do with these resolutions. Douglas goes to a special session of the Illinois legislature and comes down strongly on the side of unionism. He says, in my opinion, it's your duty to lay aside for the time being your party creeds and party platforms. Forget that you were ever divided until you've rescued the government and the country from their assailants. So McClernand is behind Douglas, and Logan always kind of followed what McClernand did. Logan is going to get behind this, and he's going to start leaning toward definitely getting on board. Refugees from the South start pouring back into Egypt, and as those numbers increase, secession sentiment declines. So a lot of Southerners from Southern Illinois had moved to the South. They come back to Illinois with all these horror stories about how terrible it is. They are vehemently anti-South, and there's 4,000 troops at Cairo. Well, there's nothing like 4,000 troops being in your backyard to change your mind about some things. So the Confederacy is recruiting in Southern Illinois, and they get a whopping 35 troops. That's all they get in Southern Illinois. So, we're pro-Southern, we're pro-secession, we have resolutions. Until it comes time to pick up a dadgum gun and go vote with your feet, and they get 35 guys, and they ended up joining the 15th Tennessee. So if you ever follow the 15th Tennessee regiment, there's 35 Illinoisans in there. The Republicans will try to tie that to Logan, too. It doesn't work. So the first Union Egyptian regiment's mobilized in May, and the paper says Illinois is changing polls, Cairo's taking precedence over Chicago. So you can do the math, 35 troops actually join the Confederacy. So McClernand, the colonel of the 21st Illinois, invites John McClernand to come speak at Camp Yates. This picture, Scott, you were there with me when I took this picture at Camp Yates. Who was the colonel of the 21st Illinois? Who was that?
John.
Not yet. He was the 31st Illinois. Ulysses S. Grant says, McClernand, I need you to come, and I never put this together until I did this research. I need you to come talk to my troops. Well, why is that? They're 90-day troops, and their 90 days are up. And I need them all to become 3-year troops. Okay, can I bring my buddy Logan with me? Yeah, I don't know, man. He's compared Lincoln to Nero and George III. No, he's solid, man. Let me bring him. Okay, cool. So he invites Logan. The 21st Illinois is from Mattoon, which is in Egypt, which is in either Logan or McClernand's congressional district, depending on how you divide it up. And this is where Logan meets Grant. Now, their job is to try to convince the 21st Illinois to become 3-year troops. If he hadn't, I think Grant would have been, you would remember him like you remember John Cook or E.A. Payne. Now, we remember Prentice and Wallace because they were at Shiloh. We remember John MacArthur. The only reason we might remember Oglesby is because he was later on governor of Illinois. But no one's ever heard of John Cook or E.A. Payne, and no one would have ever heard of Colonel Ulysses S. Grant had Logan and McClernand not gotten up and given a stem winder of a speech saying, if you don't enlist for 3 years, you're cowards, what are people at home going to think of you? And they all vote to enlist for 3 years. Had they not, you'd have never heard of Ulysses S. Grant. So you think Logan and McClernand get some goodwill from Grant for giving those speeches? Absolutely. Absolutely. Later on, Oglesby will be Logan's brigade commander for a little bit. So, Mattoon is right here, still a little bit north, but still in Egypt. So it's in the 7th Congressional District, which was a solidly Democrat district. So Logan says, I've made 3 or 4 speeches in the 9th Congressional District. In those speeches, I very candidly deprecated the causes of our present troubles, pointed to what appeared to me to be the concerted action between the abolitionists of the North and secessionists of the South to effect the dissolution of the Union. I said without disguise, as I say now, the impertinent spirit of the anti-slavery party of the North was mainly chargeable for the state of feeling in the South. I'm going to tell you what, George McClellan would have loved that. right? But this was the main Union Democrat position at the time. He's back in the 37th Congress. He personally goes to Lincoln and says, let me raise a regiment. And Lincoln's like, man, I need you to stay in Congress. Even though you're kind of foul and nasty and say terrible things and call me George III, I need pro-Union Democrats in Congress. So he says, okay. They want to repeal the fugitive slave law. He votes to table that. Probably wise at the time not to stir that up. But he votes for a bill saying that the Army does not have to return fugitive slaves. So you're starting to see a softening of his hardcore pro-slavery racist positions on some things. McClernand makes a resolution to the House to use all measures necessary to put down a rebellion. And Logan votes for that. So now remember, he goes to Lincoln because Lincoln and his dad were friends. So he's got that relationship there. So first Bull Run occurs. Logan tells his wife, keep it a secret, I'm going. According to the folklore, he temporarily joins the 2nd Michigan Regiment, and then he charges with the 12th New York, and he talks about people being wounded, and he picks up a rifle and shoots it at the Confederates and all this. Even though he's against the war, but he's participating in it. I think some of the story may be folklore. I think he was definitely at First Bull Run and just kind of watched it. I doubt he picked up a rifle and charged the Confederates. But on August 7th, finally, Lincoln writes McClernand, commissioning Logan as a colonel and making McClernand his brigade commander. So whether he charged the enemy at Bull Run or not, Lincoln does make him a colonel. So it's possible that Logan, sensing a turn in public opinion, acted when he did to take command of the new trend before it passed by him, but it's also possible that Logan's decision helped create the turn in public opinion, and as Grant maintained, win Egypt for the Union. Lincoln gave him a commission because he knew he could raise troops. So he goes back to Egypt. Illinois gets 13 more regiments in addition to the first ones that you see there from Camp Yates. The 29th and the 31st are from Egypt. They were supposed to train at Camp Butler, but Camp Butler was full because it hadn't expanded yet, so they go to Jacksonville, Illinois. There's one company from northern Illinois and from other states, and even with Canadians in it, that they threw into the 31st Illinois. But you can see all of their campaign ribbons. We'll talk about some of them here in a second. So the 31st Illinois is at Belmont under Colonel John A. Logan. You've got N.B. Buford. I have no idea if he's any relation to John Buford. You've got the 30th Illinois under McClernand. You got a little brigade under this guy with an Iowa and Illinois regiment, all under Grant. N.B. Buford's name was Napoleon Bonaparte Buford.
He's brother. They're brothers.
Are they?
Yeah.
I believe, if you say it, I take it as gospel. So Logan has his horse shot from under him. He has a pistol shot from his hand. His troops are starting to loot. Illinois had retained its formation and ranks. You guys remember the story, how they looted the Confederate camps. While they were looting the camps, Confederates brought reinforcements over the river. Logan leads the retreat back to the transports, and they get away, thankfully, without too much damage occurring. All I can tell you is this is his first command under fire, and he doesn't wet his pants. So, so far so good. Him and this other Colonel Falk go to Washington to plead for some more arms and ammunition and better weapons, better equipment. The only record of the meeting he has with Lincoln is a letter to his wife where he claims that Lincoln promised not to make it a war about abolition. You can believe that if you want to. They then go to Henry and Donaldson, so that you guys, Doug's the expert on Henry and Donaldson, I'm not. But you have two divisions. You have, under McClernand, you have Colonel Oglesby with these 5 regiments. Logan is one of those 5 regiments. This Colonel Oglesby was the guy at Camp Yates, and he'll go on to be a Republican governor of Illinois later on. So at Fort Henry, obviously they surrender to the Navy floats in and they take their surrender. Logan scouts to the east at Fort Donelson with 1 company. At Donelson, very famously, the Confederates try to break out. The 31st Illinois is right in the path of that. The narrative we hear is, McClernand, he crumbled and all this stuff. Well, it was a pretty hard battle. Logan gets hit in the left shoulder, goes back to the aid station, gets patched up, goes back to his regiment. So this is at least the 2nd or 3rd wound he's got in battle. He's then hit in the thigh, hit in the ribs. And the 31st runs out of ammo, and that's why they retreated. And Gideon Pillow said, had it not been for that regiment of regulars, I would have made a bull run of it. Well, he's referring to the 31st Illinois, who were not regulars. He's wounded so badly, his wife reads in the paper that he's dead. So she goes down to Cairo to recover his remains, and they say, oh, no, he's not dead. So she gets on a transport down to Fort Donelson. Meanwhile, Grant's put Logan on his ship and has his doctor tend to him. Yeah, he may remember, oh yeah, this is the guy that saved my bacon at Camp Yates and kept me from going to obscurity. So, but their colonel is wounded. They've just taken the brunt of this whole attack. So the 31st is in bad shape. So he misses Shiloh due to convalescence. And now he's popular because he's a wounded Civil War veteran. So the anti-war Egypt Democrats and the Republicans start a smear campaign against him. The Democrats claim he was shot by one of his own troops. There is no evidence of that. There was a John Logan at Shiloh, but he was from Carlinville and he was a Republican, and only nerds like us would ever care about that. So anyway, Grant says, I would particularly mention the names of Colonel J.D. Webster, Morgan L. Smith, W.H.L. Wallace, and John A. Logan. The two latter are from civil pursuits, but I have no hesitation in fully endorsing them and in every way qualified for the position of Brigadier General. And I think they fully earned the position on the field of battle. So back then there was no Army Achievement Medal or Army Commendation Medal. You were mentioned in dispatches. So you got the first real notice of Logan here. So he's still recovering from his wounds. He resigns from Congress. He doesn't endorse a successor. He leaves to rejoin his regiment after Shiloh. They promote him to command 1st Brigade of 3rd Division. When McClernand moves up to division, he takes his brigade, and McClernand's promoted to the reserve, right, if you remember, gives Logan command of his division for a day. So Logan's sent over to reinforce Sherman. Logan's got these railroad men, and the very famous thing in Grant's memoirs where he said, yeah, the guys put their ears to the track, and they could tell that the loaded trains were going out of Corinth and the empty trains were coming in, and so I knew that they were retreating. Well, Grant writes that in his memoirs 30 years later. You can believe it if you want to, but those were Logan's troops. Sherman says, I feel under special obligations to this officer who during the 2 days he served under me held the critical ground on my right. So again, it's named in another dispatch. After Corinth, they seized Jackson, Tennessee. He is given command of that. He eventually would command 23 regiments in that area, which is really corps size. The Emancipation Proclamation comes out, and to his wife he writes, this president's proclamation does us no good. Again, this is what McClellan would say about that, right? But he says it privately to his wife. He doesn't run his mouth. So publicly, it's crickets. He says nothing bad about the Emancipation Proclamation. He keeps his mouth shut. If only McClellan could have done the same, who knows what would have happened. So they start the Vicksburg campaign, so he's ordered to move his command back to Mississippi. His command of those 23 regiments is organized into a division, which he's given command of, part of McPherson's corps. He's part of the Holly Springs campaign up north of Vicksburg. They go into winter quarters in Memphis, and then in February they join Grant's main body across from Vicksburg. The governor pushes for Logan's promotion to Major General. The Senate does not approve. Yates goes straight to Lincoln. Lincoln approves it March 13th, backdates it to November 1862. So now he's a Major General in command of a division. They would also help try to dig that canal across the Oxbow. They're engaged in doing that. And he says, so by the way, so the announcement comes after the Emancipation Proclamation, the government's going to arm black troops. Now this is the guy who voted for the Negro Exclusion Bill, who voted to sustain the Fugitive Slave Act. Lorenzo Thomas, the Adjutant General of the Union Army, comes to speak to McPherson's corps, and they boo him off the stage. So Logan gets up and he says, we must hurt the rebels in every way possible. Shoot them with shot and shells and mini balls, and damn them, shoot them with that word. And you, my old dirty first, you are willing even a colored man should shield you from rebel bullets. I know you are. So we'll unite on this policy, putting the one who is the innocent cause of the war in the front rank and press on to victory. So Negative points for the racial slur, but I mean, at least he's given a speech to arm the black troops. This is the racist Southern guy who just 2 years ago was voting for 10 years ago voted for an exclusion bill, and etc. So they crossed the Mississippi. I'll have a map here of the Vicksburg campaign in a second. He reinforces McClernand versus John Bowen. Governor Yates and Elihu Washburn see the aftermath of that. Logan's division is in the front. Logan's horse gets shot under him, but Gregg retreats to Jackson. So it's a fairly minor skirmish of 2 divisions versus 1. But Grant and these politicians arrive to see the troops cheering, and so to them it looks like a victory. So now he's got good snapshots from Grant, from Sherman, from these 2 politicians. He knows friends with Governor Yates of Illinois, friends with the future governor Richard Oglesby. Grant is indebted to him for helping his career. So you see where this is going. So they'll cross down here. They'll end up going to Jackson, Tennessee. They'll come back to the Battle of Champion Hill. For Big Black River, they'd be in reserve, and they'll participate in the siege of Vicksburg. So Logan and 1 division of McClernand's corps flanked Pemberton with 1 brigade. Accidentally, Grant recalls that brigade. He shouldn't have done it, but he did. But Pemberton will leave the field to Grant. And Charles A. Dana, remember, Dana's sent by Stanton to observe if Grant is drinking or not. Dana says that John A. Logan is a man of instinct and not of reflection. Now, kind of a backhanded compliment, but a compliment nonetheless. So Grant's opinion of Logan is rising because every engagement Logan is in, he's front and center, and he's trying to lead his troops. And his opinion of McClernand is starting to decline. So you got 2 pro-Union Illinois Democrats. One, your opinion's going up. The other, your opinion's going down. You guys know what's going to happen next. Logan's division is one of the first ones to attack Vicksburg with that first try and get repulsed. He's wounded again. Spends a lot of time in Grant's headquarters at night. Gets promoted permanently to Major General at this time. And he helps set off a mine. So there was a mine at Vicksburg before there was a mine at Petersburg, and they had the same exact result, which it didn't work. Logan's troops suggested the mine because they were coal miners. They were Illinois coal miners, and they knew how to do the tunnel. It didn't work, just like it didn't work at Petersburg. For the surrender, Grant goes out famously between the lines with Edward Ord, James McPherson, I don't know who A.J. Smith is, some of you might, and John A. Logan. He picks those 4 officers to go with him to take the surrender. That tells you what he thinks. He doesn't take McClernand, because he doesn't like McClernand at this point.
Andrew Smith, he was general.
Cool. I still don't know who he was, but you know. Logan's division is the honor of being the first into the city. Grant, Logan, and McPherson ride in together, and Logan's named the temporary commander of Vicksburg. He's got a little bit of a mess to clean up, but he's got to feed the city, etc. He goes home to recuperate from his wounds, and the local soldiers in Egypt are on furlough are like, look, Logan, you got to set the people right on the great issues of the day, which is support this war, support the arming of the black troops. All of a sudden, the Southern Illinois troops are all on board with this. So he goes and makes pro-war speeches all over Illinois. He demonizes the Knights of the Golden Circle, who are this active shadow group, kind of an antecedent of the Ku Klux Klan. If you remember, Sterling Price always thought the Knights of the Golden Circle were going to rise up every time he came into Missouri, and it never happened. Their nemesis was the Union League, which post-war became the Republican Party Social Club. They were founded in Pekin, Illinois. So a lot of his speaking invitations come from these guys. A lot of wounded veterans that were home would join this. And after the war, they would join the Grand Army of the Republic, and they would remember this guy. So Sherman's elevated to command the Army of the Tennessee. Logan reports to Sherman, and he takes command of the 15th Corps from Frank Blair. Because Frank Blair's going back to Congress. The Illinois Republicans then float his name for governor. Republicans. He's a Democrat. So Logan stays in the 15th Corps, and when Blair comes back to the Army, Blair wants his old corps back, and Logan says, no, you can't have it. So they make Blair go to a different corps to take that command. This is the power that Logan has now. He has more power than Frank Blair, and he can tell Frank Blair, no, I'm not leaving my corps. His corps stays under McPherson for the remainder of the war. When McPherson dies, he takes temporary command of the Army of the Tennessee. Oliver Howard's the permanent commander. Oliver Howard is then named commander of the Freedmen's Bureau, and he has a choice. For the Grand March in Washington, you can stay in command of the Army, or you can give it to Logan. Oliver Howard says, man, it's really important to Logan to lead this parade. I'll let him have it. In my opinion, Oliver Howard was one of the most decent humans ever to serve in uniform. He's kind of like to the Army what Jimmy Carter is to politics, you know. He was a good dude. He wasn't maybe the best commander, but he stood aside and let Logan be in that Washington parade at the head of the Army of the Tennessee. So technically, Logan commands the Army of the Tennessee. Here's a picture of Sherman and his staff. So you've got John A. Logan, you've got Sherman. Who's that guy there? Slocum, right? Frank Blair's over here. This guy with one arm is Oliver Howard. William Babcock Hazen, I'm not as familiar with. This guy here, Jefferson C. Davis, we'll meet him again in November. We talk about, I'm sorry, Jefferson C. Davis is over here. This is a guy named Joseph Maurer. Maurer's there, Davis is there. We'll meet Davis again when we talk about Perryville. Yes, his name was Jefferson C. Davis, and he was a Union officer. He would shoot Bull Nelson in a duel and get away with it. This will have an impact at Perryville. When one of your corps commanders gets shot and dies, it has an impact on how you fight the war. So they demobilize the Army, and Logan and Frank Blair, I guess there's no sour grapes about him moving to the other corps. They go to Cooper Union and give these pro-Union speeches. The rebellion is suppressed. Slavery is forever dead. Grant was there too, but didn't say much. Who else launched their national political campaign at Cooper Union that you've heard of before? A guy named Abraham Lincoln, right? Yeah. So he has to oversee the drawdown. He's basically the senior commander in the West. So the Army of the Tennessee, the Army of Georgia, 10 regiments from the Army of the Potomac, including the Iron Brigade, they all go to Louisville. While he's in Louisville, he gives a speech to Kentucky saying, you need to adopt this 13th Amendment. You need to end slavery once and for all. So fascinating how this guy has moved his position, right? Well, Oglesby's now the governor, his former brigade commander. They use this organization to try to unseat Lyman Trumbull as the senator, like they start running veterans against him. There's 157 Grand Army of the Republic Post formed in Illinois. Logan breaks the Democratic Party formally in 1866 in a speech attended by Oglesby and William Sherman. He wanted the Senate, but he got the House again. He got outmaneuvered. He goes to the House again. He later becomes Commander-in-Chief of the Grand Army of the Republic and issues General Order 11, not that one, a different one. Ironically, first observed by the city of Columbus, Georgia, and it says this: the 30th day of May is designated for the purpose of strewing with flowers or otherwise decorating the graves of comrades who died in defense of their country during the late rebellion, and whose bodies now lie in almost every city, village, and hamlet churchyard in the land. In this observance, no form of ceremony is prescribed, but posts and comrades will in their own way arrange such fitting services and testimonials of respect as circumstances may permit. There's more to it, but that's the gist of it. This will morph into Memorial Day. And it was started by Logan when he was commander of the Grand Army of the Republic. So he's a Republican U.S. Congressman for 4 years. He's a Republican senator for 2 non-contiguous terms. He's an honorary pallbearer at Grant's funeral. There were 4 actual pallbearers. He was one of the honorary ones. He's a Republican vice presidential candidate with James Blaine. They lose to Grover Cleveland. But he's being groomed for the presidential race in 1888, but he has the bad form to die in 1886. He supported every post-war civil rights amendment. He was endorsed by Frederick Douglass. Had he not died in 1886, he might have successfully ran for president. He might be much more famous today and added to the list of all the, Grant, Garfield, McKinley, Rutherford, Rutherford Hayes, right?
Benjamin Harrison.
Yeah, Benjamin Harrison. Most of those guys were Ohioans, I think, too. Not that that has anything to do with it, but we'd have probably heard of this guy. Buried in the Soldiers and Airmen's Home National Cemetery. Here's his legacy. So Logan County, Illinois, not named for him, named for his dad. Wikipedia finally, from the time I started researching this to today, Wikipedia actually changed it and got it right that it's his dad, not him. But Logan County, Kansas, Logan County, all this was named after him. John A. Logan College, of course. His son was an Army officer and Medal of Honor winner in the Philippines. His grandson was a captain in the Marine Corps. There's a monument of him in D.C. There's a monument to him in Vicksburg. His Memorial Day order is posted in Andersonville at the cemetery, the prison there. And then there's a statue of him in Grant Park, Chicago. Illinois state song mentions three. I grew up in Illinois. I didn't know he had a song, so take that for what you will. But Lincoln, Grant, and Logan are mentioned in the song by name. There's only three that are. I don't know. It doesn't sound very catchy to me. Grant and Logan and Artiers, Illinois. It sounds kind of depressing. Probably why I had never heard of it until I did some research. And my final thought is they got a museum Tuesday through Friday, 10 to 4, Saturday 1 to 4 in Murfreesboro, Illinois. We're thinking about going there next year, although if we do it on a Saturday, they don't open until 1. That may throw a wrench in our plans. But anyway, here are my references. And either because you liked it or because it's over, it's okay to clap now. What questions might you guys have? You can leave it running.
I got a couple, Greg. One of the marks of effective leadership during the war was how many miles a general could get the troops to march in a day. How long did it take Logan to go 800 miles from Santa Fe to, from Leavenworth to Santa Fe?
You can do that math. 20 miles a day, maybe.
20 miles a day.
So, 8.
You said they were in Santa Fe for 2 months, but I wasn't clear how long it took them to get
I don't know.
Leavenworth to Santa Fe.
You can march 20 miles a day, so 100 miles a week, so it'll take them 8 weeks to get there and 8 weeks to get back, I guess.
My other question was, during the 10 years that the Negro exclusion bill was in effect in Illinois, were there any other states that had similar laws? Are you aware?
Ohio did. Salmon Chase got it repealed sooner than 1863. I'm sure there were others. I don't know of them. And then the other question, Doug may know better than I. The other question I might anticipate is, was it enforced? The answer is not very well, not really. It was enforced maybe in Egypt, but it wasn't enforced in Chicago and in Springfield. Forget it. They weren't enforcing it. Yes, sir.
In 1860, there were bills brought before the legislature here to remove all free blacks from the state, not just exclude the ones coming in or restrict the ones who were already here, but to actually remove them from the state. I don't know that the bill was ever voted on, but it was brought up in the legislature in 1860.
Yeah. Abolition was a process, right? When we found ourselves as a country, Massachusetts had slavery. And slowly, we excluded from the Northwest Territory. Well, that didn't stop Illinois as a state from trying to reintroduce it, but slowly you see states start to abolish slavery. It doesn't mean that they just welcomed African American citizens with open arms. There was a gradation of that. And Illinois was no exception. Good questions, though.
You know who told Sherman not to give Logan the command of McPherson's army?
No, I don't.
Thomas.
Lorenzo, George Thomas.
Uh-huh. He said he wasn't a West Pointer.
Yeah, I like George Thomas, but that makes the stock go down a little bit in my eyes. Because I really like Logan. After seeing how he evolved and how he changed and how he grew, that's rare for a person to grow like that, and he did. You can see it in him. And it's not just that he was a Republican, became a Democrat. That's not the point. So did Dan Sickles, and I don't like Dan Sickles. So anyway.
It seems to me it was almost the personification of the antithesis of the lost cause.
Yeah, that's a good way of looking at it. And you can't paper over his racist statements. You have to have them there and say, okay, yes, this happened. By the way, not incredibly different from some of the statements Lincoln made, but we don't want to talk, we don't like to think about some of those, but yeah. Okay, well,